Picture a store from 20 years ago. Rows of printer paper stacked to the ceiling, a wall of pens, an entire aisle just for filing folders and binder clips, a photocopy counter in the back where you'd get something printed and bound before a meeting. For an entire generation of American workers and students, that store was either Staples or Office Depot, and for a while there genuinely wasn't much difference between the two, because between them they controlled almost the entire office supply market in the country. Today, we're looking at exactly how both of those giants are quietly falling apart at the same time, and the one competitor that's been eating their lunch for over a decade without ever opening a single store that looks anything like theirs. This one is a little different from the retail stories we usually cover here, because there's no single dramatic bankruptcy filing, no one headline moment. It's two of the biggest names in American retail history, both quietly shrinking at almost the exact same pace, for almost the exact same reason, without either one of them ever quite admitting it's happening to both of them at once. Here's the scale of the industry we're talking about. Office supply stores as a sector still employ roughly 60,000 people and bring in about $10.3 billion in revenue in the United States. But according to research firm IBISWorld, that revenue is projected to keep shrinking by roughly 2% a year through the end of 2026. That's not a dramatic collapse, it's something slower and in some ways more unsettling, a business that's been quietly bleeding for over a decade with no real sign of the bleeding stopping. And when an entire industry sector shrinks that slowly and that consistently, year after year, it's almost harder to notice than a single company collapsing all at once. There's no single moment that makes headlines, just a store here, a store there, a familiar strip mall anchor quietly replaced by something else, repeated so many times across so many towns that the overall picture only becomes obvious once you actually add it all up. Part 1. Staples. Staples essentially invented the office superstore concept back in the 1980s, and its original logo, a stylized letter L designed to look like a bent staple, is still cited in design circles as a classic piece of minimalist corporate branding. But the slow retreat has been unmistakable in just the past few months alone. According to tracking data from Scrape Hero, Staples' U.S. footprint shrank from 929 stores in October 2025 down to 916 by January 2026, a net decline of 13 locations in just 4 months. And the closures haven't stopped since. In February 2026, Staples confirmed the closure of its location in Frederick, Maryland, a store that had been open for more than 20 years, following the closure of another nearby Germantown location just 6 months earlier. In March 2026, a Staples in Waterville, Maine shut its doors permanently, while nearby locations in Augusta and Bangor were confirmed to stay open, a pattern that keeps repeating across the country, one specific store closing, while a company spokesperson reassures local customers that the next town over is fine. For now. By August 2026, Staples had confirmed closures in both Goleta, California, a location that had served Santa Barbara County for more than 27 years before shutting down, and Levittown, New York, closing after more than 15 years and leaving that Long Island suburb without a Staples at all. Despite all of this, Staples isn't disappearing. The company still operates roughly 114 locations in California and 64 in New York alone, and its leadership has been careful to specify in every announcement that these closures don't represent a bankruptcy. Former Staples CEO Ron Sargent actually predicted exactly this shift more than a decade ago, acknowledging as early as 2014 that customers were buying fewer office products in person and increasingly shopping online, which made it harder for physical stores to generate the higher margin, add-on purchases that used to make each visit profitable. In other words, the people running Staples saw this coming years before most of their customers did. They just couldn't fully stop it. What's striking is how long that slow-motion decline has been allowed to play out. Most retail collapse stories move fast. A bankruptcy filing, a liquidation sale, doors closed within months. Staples has been managing this exact same downward slope for well over a decade, closing stores steadily enough to survive but never quite finding the floor where the bleeding actually stops. Part 2. Office Depot and officemax. Office Depot's story runs on an almost identical track, just with even steeper numbers. Office Depot merged with officemax back in 2013, combining into roughly 1,900 U.S. stores at the time, with the newly combined company immediately announcing plans to close 400 of them as part of the deal. That was just the beginning. Office Depot has now closed more than 1,000 locations since that 2013 merger, more than half of its entire store count at the time, and the closures have continued steadily into 2026. In Fresno, California, an Office Depot on Divisadero Street shut down in February after more than 30 years in business, with employees saying the property owner simply declined to renew the lease. In Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, the officemax closed in April 2026, and the building itself was purchased by AutoZone for $7.8 million. A small but telling detail: a former office supply store getting converted into an auto parts retailer. In Porterville, California, the officemax closing was described locally as the city's only major office supply store, meaning its closure didn't just shrink a chain, it eliminated an entire category of shopping from that town. In Merriam, Kansas, an officemax near Johnson Drive shut down after more than a decade at that location, with liquidation sales already underway. Additional locations in High Point, North Carolina, Pensacola, Florida, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Meridian, Mississippi have all confirmed closures through 2026 as well, along with stores in Grapevine and Irving, Texas, both of which kept 4th of July signage up in their windows right up until they quietly closed. The High Point, North Carolina location, inside the Peters Plaza 4 shopping center, closed on December 20th, 2025, with clearance sales offering discounts of up to 30% on remaining inventory before the doors shut for good. The retail equivalent of a going-away party nobody actually wanted to attend. Behind all of these individual store closures is a financial picture that looks genuinely fragile. Office Depot's parent company reported a GAAP operating loss of $32 million in just the first quarter of 2025, and multiple retail analysts have pointed to a real risk of bankruptcy if the pace of losses continues. Unlike Staples, which has kept insisting its closures are simply strategic footprint management, Office Depot's numbers suggest a company that may not have the same luxury of choosing its own timeline. There's a meaningful difference between a company closing stores because it's optimizing an already healthy business, which is the story Staples has told, and a company closing stores because the alternative might be running out of cash entirely, which is closer to where Office Depot's own financial filings suggest it might actually be standing. Now here's the part of the story that makes it different from almost everything else on this channel. Staples and Office Depot aren't struggling because people stopped needing pens, paper, and printer ink. They're struggling because of exactly who's been selling those exact same products instead. Amazon's rise fundamentally changed what it meant to restock a home office or a small business supply closet, letting anyone order the same paper and toner that used to require a dedicated trip and have it arrive the next day without ever leaving the house. It's a genuinely strange kind of competition for a retailer to face. Not a rival with flashier stores or better prices in the same aisle, but a competitor that doesn't need an aisle, a cash register, a parking lot, or a single employee standing anywhere near the customer at all. But Amazon isn't the only winner here. Walmart has become the leading brick-and-mortar source for low-cost stationery in the country, scooping up exactly the kind of casual, low-margin purchases, a pack of pens, a ream of paper picked up during a regular grocery run that Staples and Office Depot used to depend on as their bread and butter. And increasingly, both struggling chains are trying to survive by becoming something other than a store you walk into at all. Office Depot has specifically pivoted toward B2B distribution, closing 200 stores since 2020 while doubling down on selling directly to businesses in bulk rather than to individual walk-in customers. Staples has taken a similar path, leaning into online ordering and business services rather than fighting to keep foot traffic flowing through stores that increasingly don't need to exist in their current form or their current numbers. In a strange way, both companies are trying to become less like the stores that made them famous in the first place. The entire original pitch of the Office Superstore was the physical experience itself, walking down an aisle, comparing products in person, walking out with everything you needed in one trip. Pivoting toward B2B distribution and online business services means becoming something closer to a logistics company that happens to still have a storefront attached, rather than a destination anyone actually plans a trip around. Looking at both of these companies side by side, the pattern is almost eerily identical, and that's exactly what makes it worth paying attention to. This isn't one company making a strategic mistake while its rival thrives. It's an entire category of retail built around the specific idea of driving somewhere to buy paper and pens in bulk, becoming less necessary at almost the exact same pace for every single company trying to sell it that way. Online sales now account for 28% of the entire office supplies industry's revenue, a share that keeps climbing every single year, and it's telling that despite everything, the overall office supplies market itself, valued at roughly $183 billion in 2025, is still projected to grow slightly, just not through the stores that used to define it. The category isn't dying. The store is. That distinction matters more than it might seem. An industry that's shrinking because demand itself is disappearing has no real way back. An industry that's shrinking because customers move to a different format entirely still has plenty of revenue in it, just increasingly not for the companies still paying rent on a building full of aisles nobody walks down anymore. Staples and Office Depot spent decades competing directly against each other, right down to a blocked merger attempt in 2015 when federal regulators refused to let them combine into a single company. In hindsight, that antitrust decision might not have mattered nearly as much as either company assumed it would. They weren't really losing to each other. They were both quietly losing to a warehouse full of Amazon delivery vans in a Walmart aisle 3 feet from the checkout line, and neither one of them noticed until the stores started closing one by one. Somewhere in a Walmart right now, someone is grabbing a 3 pack of notebooks on their way to the checkout line without a second thought. The exact kind of small, forgettable purchase that used to require a dedicated trip to a store with someone's name on the sign out front. That's not a dramatic villain in this story. It's just what convenience looks like when it finally catches up with an entire category of retail that spent 40 years assuming people would keep driving somewhere just for paper and pens. Did you used to shop at Staples or Office Depot regularly? Or is there still one open near you that's always busy? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how this looks where you live.